let's talk about ancient Rome. So we look at ancient Greece. Again, it was founded, the sports were founded primarily based on religious practices. And actually, if you look across the board in the history of sport, many of the policies as well as how sports were developed are based on religious principles, whether that be the cancellation of games because of violations with religion, or dealing with games that supported religious principles or ideologies. We saw a shift from ancient Greece to ancient Rome, so we'll talk about that in this section. So the first question is, so why did the Olympic Games in ancient Greece end and not start again until 1,500 years later? The games were, again, entrenched in religious cult, and in 393 A.D., there was an Emperor Thaddeus, who was a Christian. He said that all pagan cults needed to end. And that included, again, the foundation of these ancient Greek games were the religious worship of Zeus and other Greek gods. And because of this, the Roman rule started to suppress events, and many of them that were the sporting events. And they changed the nature of the sport. The Roman games, sports, were transitioned from this religious worship to being more focused on competition and military training, which we'll talk about in a second. But they were seen as being barbaric. They would use animals and criminals and other types of activities in their events. They were seen by others. These types of sports would be seen by others as competitive and about community building. And so the biggest difference between the games was the Romans focused on military training, and that these games should be preparing their citizens and those that are watching it towards battles and conquest. And the Greek games were more about peace. They would stop the wars and be able to have these events, and it was based on religion. And so there's a dramatic shift in this. And also, they started to realize the popularity of sports as a spectator and focusing on entertainment. So again, what comes with entertainment? That is a business. And so we'll talk a little bit about that here. On the screen here, you'll see a picture. This is a picture that I took myself. My wife and I went to Rome in 2008 following our marriage. It was our honeymoon, and we were allowed to, or she told me on my birthday that we could go to any of the events or the facilities in Rome that we wanted. And so I chose all sport venues. So this was the Colosseum. This is a picture from what we would consider a concourse. And so the area surrounding the entrance to the facility. On the left of the screen, you'll see, or left of the picture, you'll see arches. These arches were entryways into the larger facility. You can also see the arches on the right that entered into certain sections. And so in Rome, they profited heavily off of their sports systems. The revenue for a lot of their citizens was considered involuntary taxes. And from a finance perspective, you can have voluntary or involuntary taxes. And we still see today this ideology of how sport and taxes are working together. In other words, that communities are using tax dollars to build and fund facilities. So a voluntary tax would be a tax on a person who chooses to partake in that activity. This is also known as an excise tax or a sin tax. Essentially, you see this on, for example, cigarettes. You buy a cigarette pack, there's a large tax that is applied to that. The general population does not have to pay that tax, only the people who use that product. The same is true if you get in a hotel. You get a hotel in a city, there is a maybe a rental car tax or a hotel occupancy tax. Those taxes are voluntary. You're the one that chose to go to that city and stay in that hotel. And generally, voluntary taxes are seen by citizens of that community as being okay, because they're not the ones that are footing the bill for these tax money. It's the people who are coming into their city, causing more traffic and more issues. And so many people are okay with that. Now, the opposite is true when we talk about involuntary taxes. Involuntary taxes are essentially those that are put upon you regardless of whether you use those services or not. And so in the ancient Roman days, the citizens were essentially required to buy a ticket depending on their certain social class, or their social class system would give you essentially a required tax to help pay for facilities and activities and to make the Roman Empire more profitable. And so in the modern day, ticketing systems are oftentimes founded on the Romans' methods of ticketing. So, for example, these arches I was talking about, each arch is a different entrance, and the ticket that you received matched the numbers at the top of each of the arches. And if you were in, I'm making this up, number 1, you would walk in through the number 1 arch and sit in the number 1 section. If you were number 2, you would go through the number 2, and so on and so forth. And if you were caught trying to go into a section or going through a gate that was not in your ticketed or your numbered section, then you were punished for that. And all of the seating was based on social class systems. So look at today's society. Now, most facilities, you can enter into any entrance, but some of them have specialized entrances for those that are in pay higher prices. So look at Minute Maid Park in Houston. There is a special season ticket holder entrance. The same is true, I believe, at Texas Rangers ballpark in Arlington. But people are paying larger sums of money to be a season ticket holder, and therefore they get a special entrance that allows them in before the game. And typically those lines are shorter, so you can get in quicker and get to your seat quickly. The same is true in Rome. When you exited, you would have to go in and out of your same exit, sit in your required social class seating. Now, you might say, okay, well, anybody can sit in front row. Well, in theory, yes. It doesn't really matter what social class you're in, is what section you can sit in today's sports facilities. But if you look at how tick prices are oftentimes taking people out of certain social classes and not allowing them access to it. Somebody who can't afford a $500 to $1,000 ticket behind home plate would arguably be involuntary tax, or in this circumstance, a voluntary tax, to get into your section. And so the social class systems are still seen today in a lot of our ticketing systems and how they're set up. So beyond just the arches, the other types of the facility also kind of help us understand a little bit more about our current sport facilities. So this is a picture that I took from inside the Coliseum, and you can see a lot of it's been refurbished. First of all, if you look at it, it looks really old. One of the things is the Coliseum used to be covered in marble, both inside and out. But when the Vatican was built, which is in Rome, the Catholic Church decided to take marble from around the city and repurpose it for the building of the Vatican, Vatican City. And so a lot of this was overgrown over the years. They took away from the marble that came from it. So it's not looking like it was at its prime. But you can see kind of how they've tried to reconstruct it. The actual surface was solid. You can see it looks like a dirt solid surface, but it covered up underneath pre-entry tunnels. And this is where they would put, in ancient times, Christians and gladiators and animals. Similar to what you would see in the movie The Gladiator. This is where they would essentially prep them before any of the activities that occurred on the field, and then they would enter through the field. Interesting enough, though, they could also flood or block off the entire floor and flood it and have mock naval battles. This was very rare in the Coliseum. Most of the time when they did this, it was on the other areas around town that were more for private, higher class spectatorship. Palatine Hills, where one of them was. But however, it was rarely done in the Coliseum. Particularly, again, was only done in front of royalty and dignitaries that they would do this. But essentially, you could see how the construction of the Roman Coliseum was mirrored off of the Greek games, where you had the U shape. In this circumstance, was somewhat of an oval. And then you had the elevated seating so that you can have lots of people inside the facility. And the unique thing is how they set up this facility is they would be able to enter and exit people into and out of the facility before and after games within a relatively quick period of time. About 15 to 20 minutes, they could exit about 50 to 60,000 people because of the ticketing structure and the system they had set in place, which again has been mirrored throughout time. And so Rome profited from a lot of things in their sports systems. They profited from criminals. So some of the criminals were really given two options. They could fight as a gladiator or be hung. And so many of them chose the gladiator, which you can see from the gladiator movie. Violent gladiator events increased in demand over time. This demand increased, but the supply stayed the same. In other words, they couldn't really add seats. And so this is where pricing theory started to come into play, is how do we go about increasing our revenue because the demand goes up. If we look at supply and demand, prices increase to a point at equilibrium, and then the profits start to increase. And so as long as the demand is there and they're able to sell tickets through different higher social class systems, then they'll continue to increase the prices. Rome also profited off of other things, promotions. So promotions work. Sometimes they offered free food to people of Rome if they attended the events, so try to get more people interested. You also see government starting to use sports to frame messages. So in marketing, we have a thing called framing. Framing is essentially the same as you would put a picture into a frame. The picture in of itself, it doesn't change, but how you dress up that picture in the frame says something about that picture. You put a diploma in a nice frame. You put a family portrait in a nice frame as opposed to one that you might put on your desk or places that wouldn't be that special. The same thing is true for marketing messages. The message is the same, but how do we play up that message? How do we explain it and show it to consumers? And so governments would start to do this in the ancient Roman games where they would frame messages. So sport was a way to promote ideals of the government and divert attention away from all of the Roman wars around the world. And so this idea of using government and sports to try to provide support, camaraderie, is not unheard of and is still used today. So for example, this worked around September 11th, and there's lots of videos out there, and actually the one I want to show you is about our political leaders. What happened was after 9/11, all of the events, sporting events in the United States were shut down for a short period of time, and then they were opened back up. The reason why people wanted sport again during a time, this trials, was because they needed to have a sense of identity and belonging to the country in which they lived and of its citizens. They wanted to also increase support for political leaders and government. And so I'm going to post a video and you can go watch it. It's about what happened post 9/11. It talks a little bit about political leaders and how specifically George W. Bush after 9/11 used sport as a way to unite the country. And so the question we've got to ask is, what does framing have to do with marketing? It explains a lot of things about how our consumers learn more about who we are and what we believe in, both as a organization, as a business, or as a country or civilization. And so in conclusion, Rome, sport business flourished. It was a shift from religious practices to entertainment and military training. It developed systematic laws. It gave us central market locations where people could come together under one roof for sporting events, and then improved our communication systems and gave us some foundation in which marketers can build and did build upon.